Hey everyone, Chaps here, and welcome to the first video in this new series I'm doing about financial planning. As some background, I went to school for engineering, not economics, and my only economics class was an intro to econ class I took freshman year. That said, I've been doing a lot of research and watching YouTube videos, browsing forums and Reddit and stuff recently this year because I want to get a better understanding of how finances work and I want to get a better understanding of where I sit personally. So I've learned a ton this year, and I figured, you know what, I'm going to pass these learnings along to everyone else. Think of it as a finance noob passing his learnings on to someone else who's trying to learn more about finance. And being I'm new to all of this, if I make any mistakes, hopefully I don't, but if I do, just let me know down below. I'll pin a comment with a list of any, hopefully it's a small list, and I'll try to make an updated video to correct some of that. So how did this all start? Well, when my brother freshly graduated college, he was asking a couple finance questions, along with my parents who are around the retirement age, and I started to look into things a bit. I wrote my brother a nice long email listing out, these are the things that I would look into and the priority that I would do, things like that, just really based on his personal situation. Come to find out, the subreddit r/personalfinance, which is a fantastic sub by the way, has a flowchart that matched very well with what I had sent my brother from my own individual research. It wasn't perfect, but it was pretty close. I found Reddit to be a fantastic source of knowledge. Of course, don't take everything you see as the gospel, but I found many subs to be fairly reliable. Basically, I see it as trust but verify. I've passed this flowchart around to a few people, and it really seems to help them. Because of that, I wanted to make this first video just walking through the phases. Sure, you can read the chart on your own, which I would highly suggest, but if you want more color commentary along the way, hopefully this video will help with your understanding. And now just one last note before I hop into going through this flowchart. I'm going to go through the entire thing in a little bit of detail, and I'm going to go through all of the steps. But that doesn't mean that everybody is going to make it through all of the steps. In fact, I think most people probably aren't going to make it through all of the steps. So you just work your way through, do what you can. The further along you get, the better. And along the way, ask why. You see a step, ask yourself, why are you doing this step? If you don't understand, maybe this video is going to explain that for you. I don't know. If I don't explain it well enough, then do some of your own research. Just make sure you understand why you're doing the step. You progress through, and the further along you get, the better off you're probably going to be in the long run. But you really need to decide for yourself if it's reasonable for you in your given current situation. So they've color-coded things into a 7-phase system, which is a really nice touch. Phase 0 is what I call the essentials. Really, it's anything you need to be doing for the basics of living day to day. We start with creating a budget. Really, it's tracking where money comes in and where money goes out. In order to ground yourself, you really need a solid understanding of your cash flow. Yeah, I know this isn't really essential. You don't really need this in order to live day to day. But if you're trying to get a better grasp on your current financial situation and plan for the future, this kind of is a necessary step to take up front. Alright, so after we do that, next we need to pay off the required fees. That's going to be rent or mortgage, your groceries, and the essential utilities and essential items. No, I'm not talking about the fun utilities like internet or cell phone. Some might think those are required, but I'm really at this point talking about the ones that are required to live. You need water and probably heat or air conditioning or something like that. These are the ones that are basically required for your health and safety. Now we get to the whole you need to spend money to make money thing. This is often thought of for investors, but honestly everyone is doing this just at different levels. Again, this category is not for paying off fun utilities, like you see internet listed here. This is paying off any expenses that are required for you to continue making income. You're investing money in yourself now so that you can continue making this income. If your job requires internet, then sure, you need to pay off internet. And if you need to travel for work, this is where you pay for bus or transportation fees. Next, we get to healthcare and insurance. While it may not be mandatory in some cases, if you're able to get this far through the flowchart, you really should be investing in yourself a bit. You really don't want to find yourself further behind due to an injury or an accident. It's really just a failsafe. This last step on phase 0 is to make the minimum payments on debts. This could be student loans, credit card bills, or other loans. Not meeting minimum payments will cost you severely and destroy your credit score. Depending on your current situation, phase 0 may be difficult to get through, but once you're able to get through it, you've sort of obtained this, what I'll call a minimum fundamental standard of living. Now you can move on to some of the next steps. Phase 1 is about protecting yourself and providing a slight increase to your standard of living. The first step here is to create an emergency fund. This is money you set aside in a savings account that you don't plan to use unless absolutely necessary. The typical example is that you lost your job and need some cash to hold you over until you get a new one. The chart recommends about $1,000 or 1 month's expenses. Basically, that's enough to get you through phase 0 of this chart for 1 additional month. This will certainly need to increase, but 1 month's expense is enough for now. It's here that we can feel comfortable enough to purchase some non-essentials. You're making the minimum payments and have a small rainy day fund. So now spend a little bit on quality of life. Get internet, cable, phone, maybe a subscription service. Just get something to improve the quality of life a little bit. An important note here is to ensure that it's something that you can pay for in full. You don't want to build up additional debt at this point. In phase 2, we get to some employee benefits. With some employers, you can opt for a retirement account, such as a 401k. Often this will include some form of employer match. That could be something along the lines of, the company will add 50 cents for every $1 you contribute to the plan, up to 5% of your salary, or something like that. Yes, this means that you need to contribute to the plan, which hurts your current paycheck, but it's essentially free money that your employer is giving you. Not to mention that your contribution is paying your future self. This mentions that if the plan is offered, at this point you should contribute the amount of money necessary to reach the full employer match. With my example above, you could put in 8%, but they'll only match the first 5%. So for now, just put in 5%. This will get you as much free money as possible with minimal impact to your paycheck. Sure, we'll probably want to increase that later, but right now, it's what is the minimum that we can contribute in order to get the most out of our employer. Phase 3 is about eliminating high-interest debt. Here that's called out as 10% or higher. This part of the flowchart starts to become a little less rigid and allows for some flexibility, like that 10% isn't some magic number, you may have some wiggle room there. That said, debt is bad, especially high-interest debt, so paying it off quickly is important. By reaching phase 3, you're now hopefully starting to see your bank account grow each month. If you have debt, that additional money should likely be spent to pay down the debt more quickly. Just paying the minimum amount will cause it to drag out and cost you thousands in interest over time. There's 2 main approaches to paying off debt, the snowball approach and the avalanche approach. If you do have debt that needs to be paid off, I'd recommend reading up on them, but at a high-level summary, avalanche involves you paying off your highest interest loans and working your way down to the lowest one. You always make the minimum payment required on all of your debts, but the remainder of that debt allocation in your budget will go to the higher interest accounts. This will likely be the most efficient way of paying off debt, but it can be a little more taxing mentally if you're not up for the challenge. On the other hand, we have the snowball method. Rather than focusing on the interest rate, you focus on the balance remaining. Again, you pay the minimum for all accounts, but then the remainder will go towards the debt with the lowest remaining balance. This will help you more quickly knock out some loans. It's not quite as efficient, but it provides some solid motivation early on by knocking out some of those smaller loans. Again, look into the pros and cons for each, and figure out which one works best for you. At this part of the flowchart, we actually jump back to phase 1 for the emergency fund. Once the extremely high interest debt is paid off, look at increasing that emergency fund to 3 to 6 months. The duration will really depend on how safe you feel and how quickly you think you could bounce back. They mentioned putting this in a checking or savings account. Personally, I would look at a high-yield savings account at this point, often abbreviated as a HYSA. Basically, it's an online savings account that will typically have a much higher interest rate. Keep enough money in your standard checking account for day-to-day use and your monthly payments. But for an emergency fund or that rainy day fund, I find it best to keep it somewhere else separate. It's there if I need it, but I'm not seeing it sitting there every day. Not to mention that with the HYSA, it's growing a bit faster. So back on to phase 3, this time for anything that's in that 4 to 9% interest range, excluding your mortgage if that falls in here. I will say that if your mortgage is in this range, you'll want to track interest rates. It may be useful to refinance if you can get a lower rate. Just as with the higher interest debt, it's time to start evaluating paying off these mid-range debts. Again, look at snowball versus avalanche. It's the same approach, but with less aggressive or disruptive loans. If you've made it this far, you're in a pretty good spot. You've budgeted everything, grown an emergency fund, taken advantage of some free money while investing in yourself for retirement, and most crucially, you've paid off some pretty high interest loans. So now we move on to phase 4. This is where we can increase the savings for retirement and plan for some near future expenses. We'll start by looking for more free money. This isn't quite as nice as the employer match that I discussed earlier, but now's a great time to start investing in an individual retirement account known as an IRA. These are tax-advantaged accounts, meaning you get some benefit when it comes to taxes. I have an entire video dedicated to if a traditional IRA or a Roth IRA is best. That's linked below, but general guidance is, if you plan to be in a higher tax bracket when you retire, then Roth is better. If you plan to be in a lower tax bracket when you retire, then pre-tax is better. It's more complicated than that, but again, you can see my other video or do some research on your own. Just figure out which IRA works best for you and increase your contribution until that's maxed out. Just rest assured that the future you is going to be thanking you for investing in retirement. So after setting up for the distant future you, let's look at the near future you. Do you have any large required purchases coming up? Maybe you want a new car, or you want to repair your car so that you can get to work. College coming up? Maybe for your son or daughter? If you have any of these types of things coming up, go ahead and start setting some cash aside. Again, I'd recommend an HYSA, that high yield savings account for this, or maybe even some CDs. Put it somewhere with a decent interest rate where you can't see it and you can't be tempted by it. And I guess I'll clarify that this money does need to remain liquid. Like, CDs are great, but don't lock it up in a CD unless you know that you can wait that long in order to take it out. Okay, so if we've accomplished that, we're on track for some of those initial retirement savings and some of our near-term purchases. On to phase 5, where we'll increase our retirement contribution. Don't get me wrong, the IRA contributions we just discussed and the 401 contributions that you're hopefully able to make are a great start, but in order to retire at a reasonable age, we're going to want more stored away. A general rule of thumb is to put about 15% of your pre-tax income into a retirement account of some sort. If you're not here by 25 to 30-ish, and many aren't, that's fine, but if you're not there, you may want to increase this above 15 slightly, if you're able to, in order to catch up a little bit. If you're not able to get there, that's fine as well. Really, the remainder of this can be seen as a bonus to help you retire a bit earlier. With phase 6, which is the final phase, we're onto some of the more advanced tactics and planning for an earlier retirement or planning for some large non-essential purchases. It's not really in this flowchart, but depending on how secure you are in your job and what lifestyle you want to live between jobs should the unfortunate happen, well, some may want to look into increasing the size of their rainy day fund. I wouldn't go any more than, let's say, 1 year's worth of funds, but just think through where you want to keep this in the 6 to 12 month range. This also might be a good spot to bring up I-bonds. These are bonds that track inflation. I don't bring them up as a great long-term investment, but as an alternative for an emergency fund, or part of your emergency fund. You can't withdraw with money within the first year, so if you can't get past that, just ignore it. If you can get over that hurdle, then this is a pretty solid option. Hopefully your emergency fund is in something with a higher interest rate, such as a high-yield savings account, but even that is likely to be lower than what an I-bond can offer. It's not for everyone, but if you're able to get past that first-year hurdle, I-bonds are a nice alternative to look into. Okay, so back to that original flowchart. We'll start with the HSA. Depending on your health plan at work, you might be eligible for an investable HSA account. This is essentially another tax-advantaged account, but it's limited to medical claims. This money is investable though. Well, I guess a portion of it is investable. It can also be used in retirement to pay for some Medicare expenses. What about if you have kids? Well, perhaps there's a savings bond or a 529 plan, or a Roth IRA that you want to open for them. Are you this far through the chart? If you are, then great job. You've probably got a pretty good handle on things. But how do you handle your money moving forward? You're probably going to want to do a combination of the two items listed here. The first is that you're likely going to have some goals for purchases to save up for. Buying a house, getting married, big vacation coming up. Save for things like this in various accounts based on how far out the purchase is. If it's less than a year out, probably an HYSA is the best thing. 1 to 3 years, again, those high-yield savings accounts, CDs, and maybe even some bonds. 3 to 5 years, again, high-yield savings account, CDs, and maybe at this point a conservative combination of bonds and stocks. Anything greater, and you'll likely do the same thing, but err a bit more on the side of stocks. Either in conjunction with that, or if you don't have any large purchases planned, it's at this point that you can really plan on trying to retire a bit earlier. Your best bet here is to start investing as much as possible. You could invest in a standard account, but you could do better using a tax-advantaged account like your 401k. Maxing this out before moving to non-advantaged accounts should be your best bet. I mean, even if you max this out, you're not technically done. There's the backdoor Roth IRA or the mega backdoor Roth, and both of these are options that let you bypass those limits on those accounts. I also have some videos coming out about those, and I'll have those linked down below. But again, These are rare things that you only do when you get extremely far through the flowchart and you're just trying to retire a bit earlier. And with that, we're at the end of the flowchart. I'm going to have it linked down below, along with a few other sources that you might find useful. I want to emphasize that this chart, along with most of the things you see online, aren't a hard fast rule that you need to follow. It's more or less a guideline that will hopefully get you started and point you in the right direction. Like maybe you've never heard of snowball versus avalanche mindset for paying off debt. Maybe you didn't realize that you should be putting more money into a Roth IRA. Anyways, I hope you all found this useful. Like I said before, I'm not a finance guy. I honestly just started looking into this stuff in early 2022. I just figured that maybe this noob learning some stuff and sharing it will help some people out. Speaking of which, if you did find it helpful, a like would be super appreciated. And I also have plenty of other finance videos coming out, so make sure you subscribe so that you don't miss those. And lastly, as I mentioned earlier, I'm new to this, I could make mistakes. If you caught one, or if you have any questions, just leave them down in the comments below, and I read all of them. I'll try to get back to you. Thanks for watching, everyone, and I'll catch you next time.